We are speaking tonight on artificial intelligence in education. This is going to be geared in a lot of cases toward our students. Parents, if you're joining us, make sure to stick around. I have a lot of, I think, ideas on things that you might want to watch out for. And of course, students are going to have, opportunities to ask questions if they have any at some point. We'll see how much time we have. I do have sort of a hard stop this evening at 7 o'clock, unfortunately, but let's go ahead and get underway. Again, artificial intelligence in education, how to leverage AI as a modern student. So first and foremost, let's get a quick introduction out of the way. As I mentioned, my name is Stephen. I am the Director of Education here at Beyond Education Consulting. I've been working in test preparation, academic support, dabbled a little bit in college consulting as well for the past 10 years, coming up on 11, maybe even 12, actually at this point, might be closer to 12 that I've been working with students. Just making sure they kind of find their way in education, finding their paths to higher learning in most cases, going to college, making sure they're successful and happy with the campuses that they land on. Beyond Education Consulting itself is a full service organization. We are here for you when it comes to test preparation, academic support. Again, if you have questions or concerns about summer classes, or you anticipate a very difficult school year ahead of you, whether you're a rising junior or just transitioning into middle school or something to that effect, we're definitely here to help you out. Internships, mentorships, the whole thing. But that's a little bit about who I am and who we are. Let's go ahead and talk about tonight's topics. Let's go ahead and break down what we'll be reviewing together. Out of the gate, we're going to go ahead and discuss ChatGPT, this wonderful new tool, I think, for students. First and foremost, what is it? What does it do? You may have heard of ChatGPT. You might have seen news articles about it. You might have learned from other families that there's some concerns about ChatGPT, or other students are already utilizing it in some unique ways. We want to talk about those ways. What can students use it for, and what more specifically can ChatGPT offer for specific coursework? The math, history, English. What kind of opportunities does ChatGPT offer us in terms of learning? Right? That's kind of the big concern. How do we use ChatGPT and AI models like it to go ahead and be more effective learners? And of course, as parents or teachers, other stakeholders, more effective educators, right? In one way or another, whether you're a parent or a teacher, a member of a school district, you're going to be someone who has some hand in student learning. So you should probably know a little bit about some of the tools they'll be working with. Again, specifically ChatGPT. You're going to hear that word a lot tonight. I apologize. ChatGPT, I want to be clear, it's being used as a model for really any kind of artificially intelligent interaction that students may be coming across when it comes to learning. But there's a lot of different models out there. So I know ChatGPT is going to be kind of my catch-all. Just to be clear, there's tons and tons out there, more probably every day at this point. So also, again, schools, educators, parents, what do you want to know about ChatGPT or artificial intelligences like it? What is the response by schools, educators, teachers? How have they generally responded to the emergence of this opportunity for students? And additionally, parents, what should you be aware of? There's, some concerns around ChatGPT, but I would say that parents' concerns may not mirror educators' concerns, right? There might be some disconnects there. There might be some overlap, right? So we'll have some discussion around that. My plan is to give you some of my thoughts. Again, since I've been working with students for more than a decade, I do want to give some perspective on kind of how I see things, being someone who works outside of the schools. Obviously here at Beyond Education, we are focused on students who feel they're just not getting enough support in one way, shape, or form from their school, or they're, pursuing something that's fairly selective, fairly rigorous, like a standardized test or something like that. And we'll talk about how ChatGPT relates to those too. And finally, what are the implications for real learning? So this is kind of a big subtitle under all of this. We'll talk about how students can utilize this. We'll talk about how parents and teachers are responding to it. But ultimately, what are the implications? What are some sort of takeaways from this new development? How can we anticipate the future of education a little bit? Or how can we anticipate some things we now have to be concerned about, etc.? So we'll talk about that as well. All right, with no further ado, let's get into the first topic. ChatGPT, what is it? What does it do? Well, ChatGPT is what we call a language model, or an artificially intelligent language model. It's effectively a conversational search engine. So I want to be clear, ChatGPT has been trained, quote unquote, on data as we see here, books, articles, web pages, anything that was available online up to about September of 2021. That is the wealth of information, the foundation basically that ChatGPT has been nursed on. In other words, it's been used to inform everything ChatGPT needs to know to answer questions or otherwise handle any query you might throw at it. Just to be clear, it has no thoughts of its own. So every time we talk about artificial intelligence, the immediate thought is something like Terminator or some kind of, in most cases, malicious entity that exists in a computer or a server somewhere. ChatGPT, even though it is fair to call it artificially intelligent, is not artificially intelligent to the point of sentience. It does not have its own thoughts. It does not have its own opinions. It does not have its own feelings, anything like that. Now, you might hear stories about AIs that do, and that's a whole other topic. It's beyond the scope of this discussion. But again, when we talk about artificial intelligence, when you have your son or daughter possibly log on to ChatGPT, they are not talking to a bot, if you will. They're not talking to anything that, again, has its own thoughts, has its own feelings, has its own opinions. So, it's just, again, it's pulling a lot of information from the internet as it existed up until September 2021. If you ask, for example, about the attempted Russian coup that just happened, if you talk about the OceanGate disaster that just happened, it will have no knowledge. It can talk about other Russian revolutions or other submersible disasters, but it can't speak to those because it has no knowledge of them, right? It doesn't learn in the same way that we do. It can't keep up to date with things, again, beyond September 2021. And there we go. Sorry, I forgot I had this. Forgot I had this bullet point. But again, it can answer questions. It can provide suggestions. It can even translate languages. I probably did not mention that. It can summarize topics. It can go ahead and generate novel content. You can ask it to write stories for you, in fact. So a lot of people were talking about when it first came out, if you would like ChatGPT to write you a lullaby or to write you like a Dr. Seuss kind of informed children's book, it can do those things. Now, of course, it can't generate images. It really is just a text-only kind of, as it says, language model right now. So it's the case where it can do anything really that has to do with text, anything you can get away or manage through typing. ChatGPT can handle it. It can check your grammar, check your spelling, and again, it can check that through a multitude of languages. With that said, I want to be clear. In the same way that Google Translate, right, can sometimes have inaccuracies or be missing elements of flash and flair and flavor from the countries where a given foreign language is natively spoken, ChatGPT will have those flaws too, right? As I said, it's trained on everything that was on the internet. And so if Google Translate or other translation services, if they have some errors or they're simply not able to incorporate regional dialect information, slang, etc., ChatGPT won't either. It just doesn't have the information to do so, or the information is very limited or possibly outdated in some cases. So again, it can handle foreign languages. It can handle just about anything you want to throw at it, but it's not perfect, right? And it's also not sometimes as nuanced as you might want it to be, given that it's not localized or has no local information specifically. It's got giant information, right? Lots of stuff to work through. So you're looking at like aggregates, basically, of information. So let's go ahead and get to what students can do with it, just sort of in a general sense, and then we'll switch to more detailed kind of examples that we've come up with from there. Now, at a K through 12 level, and again, I want to stress a lot of this conversation focuses on K through 12 students, because college is just a different animal entirely when it comes to the rigors, when it comes to the responsibilities, the expectations. K through 12 is the majority in most cases of our education, of our students' educations. So, college, we're not speaking to as much, although I want to be clear, ChatGPT has huge benefits to college students. So some of what they might find here could be useful, but again, mostly K through 12 is what we're talking about tonight. Any kind of student learning can be supported in a variety of ways. I want to be clear, ChatGPT, I think, has something to offer about everybody in the K through 12 system out of the gate. Students can, for example, ask for quizzes on topics they want to verify their understanding of. So one of the things that can sometimes be challenging for, this actually, goes to parents too, can sometimes be challenging is we have our access to a textbook, we have our access to homework or study guides, but beyond those things, is there something novel I can get access to test my students' understanding of a topic? Can I help them in some way, or can they help themselves? ChatGPT can do that. It's capable of generating quizzes. It's capable of asking students questions back. So in the same way that I might ask my professor or my teacher, I could say, Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith, could you go ahead and give me a quick quiz on the topic of integration and mathematics? Could you go ahead and ask me a few questions that would sort of satisfy you and be able to say, okay, yeah, Steve really knows his stuff about integration. In the same way you could ask that of a teacher, if you were in their office hours or something to that effect, you can ask that of ChatGPT. You can go ahead and ask ChatGPT to ask you questions and see if you're able to answer them to its satisfaction. So that is one thing that I think is very unique, and we'll talk a bit more about what that might look like down the line. Additionally, students can check writing in any language. So I mentioned foreign language here, only because when students are learning foreign languages, it can of course be very challenging. Foreign languages are things that are usually best understood and learned through speaking, but also through writing. So in a lot of ways where writing challenges may emerge for foreign language learning, ChatGPT kind of has students covered there. It can work with really any language there is, including those that are no longer spoken. So for example, Latin. Latin can be very tricky for many students because it's not a spoken language, or at least not currently spoken by any singular nation. It has informed many languages over the years, but there's no one country that still speaks in Latin. So where do you get spoken Latin access, or even a lot of easily accessible written Latin? ChatGPT can help there. But I want to stress once more, if you look around online, you might find a lot of ineffective or maybe slightly off translations of Latin just around the web, right? Because of course it's something that sometimes people study as a hobby, or they get misinformation in some cases, but they put it all online. ChatGPT may have seen some of that, may have incorporated some of that. And again, it just wouldn't know any better in some cases. I'm not saying ChatGPT is necessarily wholly inaccurate or has problems that are really significant when it comes to accuracy. But once more, because it's informed by everything online, the more obscure something is, the potential it has, I would say, more so for inaccuracies or misinterpretation. And Latin is arguably one of the more obscure languages one might learn. So I want to go ahead and put that out there. Additionally, students can ask this is kind of a funny one. This is something that normally you wouldn't see in a history class. So along with some of the things I was mentioning a moment ago that a professor or a teacher could do, this is one that I think they would have some trouble with. So if you went to your teacher and you said, we're doing this discussion of Abraham Lincoln, his life and times, how he came up as a politician, how he came up as a person, wouldn't it be great if I could actually speak to the man and know a little bit more about his thoughts? And of course, the teacher may be willing to engage in that kind of role play, maybe not. It'd be kind of great, I think, if they did, if they had that passion for it. I would think that would be fantastic. But in most cases, it just won't be an opportunity that students have. You can ask ChatGPT to kind of mimic in some way, to the best of its ability, how someone like Abraham Lincoln may have spoken and or may have thought. Because of course, online, it has access to biographies, articles, really a wealth of information on what his thoughts were on a variety of positions. And so therefore, we can go ahead and have ChatGPT sort of synthesize a personality, if you will. And it's usually fairly good at this. As an example, there was a news article, a news report, I should say, that was asking ChatGPT to pretend to be George Washington, as if there was a time machine we used, we were going back. And of course, the first thing that George Washington in this quote unquote interview said was, wow, check out your time machine. So it's very specific about what it is you tell is going, what you tell it is going on. If you explain to it that you're using a time machine to go back and speak to George Washington, the first thing, of course, George Washington says is, hey, cool time machine, or what is that you have there? So again, it can be very good about being very specific and very literal when it comes to kind of reenacting some of these things. Now, how much use of this is this to a student? It can vary, of course. It'll depend upon the assignment. It'll depend upon what the teacher is expecting, etc. And there's some other challenges that we'll talk about a little bit more down the line. But as a general idea, I thought that was kind of a funny one. So let's talk about utility now for specific classes. So in other words, let's say you have a math class, a history class, a language arts class. What specifically can you do with ChatGPT to go ahead and provide utility, to give you some deeper insight into what it is you're studying? So out of the gate, let's talk about the sciences. ChatGPT, again, has a wealth of knowledge from all manners of, all fields of sciences. It is something where from a K through 12 perspective, any science class you're going to have, ChatGPT is going to arguably be an expert. It can balance chemical equations for you. It can talk about kinematics equations in physics. So kinematics equations, one of the things that I struggled with the most during my high school tenure. And of course, having someone to explain them to me in a variety of ways would have been, I should say, really useful. It can provide examples of biological concepts. So things that sometimes are very difficult to appreciate, like the interconnectivity of a food web, for example. That's something ChatGPT can go ahead and break down really in as many ways as you want it to over a variety of biomes. So whether you're looking at a food web in some part of Asia, Africa, some part of Europe, some part of the Americas, it really can go ahead and provide insight into these things. And I would say that might make things more interesting. You know, one of the challenges a lot of textbooks have is that they're static. We see this as educators ourselves. We see it, of course, in students' reactions. Textbooks are only capable of explaining things one way. That's why teachers and now ChatGPT can be so valuable. You can get explanations of, again, food webs or other elements of science in a variety of ways until you find a topic or a context that, as to you as a student, is most interesting. And so if you learn it through that context, well, more the better, right? If you have this general interest in something and you can see it in science, I think that's a great thing. And it's something we certainly strive to do as educators ourselves. So ChatGPT can be used in a variety of ways to just further break down scientific concepts for, again, really any of the sciences, no matter what they are. I haven't mentioned it, but psychology might be lumped in here as well. Psychological concepts can be kind of difficult to digest in some cases. So ChatGPT will have information on that as well. For the maths, ChatGPT can solve math problems. I mentioned earlier, anything that you can do through typing, well, ChatGPT can interact with that. So of course, math, we can go ahead and put together any variety of math equations. We can describe math equations or even word problems to ChatGPT. And sometimes it'll go ahead and solve them in a variety of ways for us too. So it's not a sort of one size fits all depending upon the math you're doing, right? We sometimes hear about how students will solve problems that are better served by algebra with calculus or problems that are better served by calculus with algebra. So there's this kind of clash, if you will, between ways of thinking and math, at least initially. Certainly down the line, it kind of all comes together more or less. But the bottom line is that how you approach a given math problem, well, there can be some variability, or some variety there. So with ChatGPT, we might be able to see a variety of ways of solving certain problems that can sometimes teach us new ways of going about things. One thing I also add there at the end is you can ask for math problems from ChatGPT. You can simply tell it, hey, I would like to learn more about triangle proofs or geometric proofs. Can you go ahead and give me some problems or ask me to prove something through a series of steps or a series of explanations? And ChatGPT can go ahead and do that. It'll go ahead and verify whether you're correct or not. And once more, it's doing this through access it has to the internet, through access it has to information that is, well, again, quite massive, quite significant. For language arts, I mentioned this already, but ChatGPT, we talk about Grammarly, I think is something we've all kind of heard of. It can effectively do the job of that. If you give ChatGPT a piece of writing, it can go ahead and check your grammar, check your spelling. You can even ask it to suggest vocabulary improvements to anything you've put together. You can ask it for insight into themes for novels that you're reading or provide character analyses. You can really kind of ask ChatGPT for kind of just about anything. Now, one thing I want to go ahead and stress is it'll only be able to do so for books that it is familiar with. And it'll only be familiar with books that have some kind of summary or some kind of explanation that, again, exists online somewhere. If ChatGPT, if you start talking to it about a very obscure book or a book that is less talked about online, then ultimately it won't really know these things. Now, again, the field is wide, and most high schools and most middle schools use arguably the kind of same field of books. So most of what you might see in middle school and high school, ChatGPT is going to have a window into, just to be clear. This is not something that I've found to be limited in any meaningful way as to what it has access to. And certainly the majority of books that, again, students are going to read and be having experiences with, ChatGPT either has exactly information on that book, or it has some kind of analog, right? Something that's going to be similar enough where we can see some parallels and better understand the story, maybe through a slightly different lens. So, feel free to utilize it as well for generating counter arguments or discussing arguments with it. There, I think, is definitely a trend in some schools where we want to see strong theses, we want to see strong positions taken by students in their writing, but it's difficult to assess strength as a student, especially if you haven't really taken a deep dive into composition and argumentative writing in your classroom, because a lot of classrooms focus on more of the reading aspect and less of the writing aspect, unfortunately. ChatGPT may be able to offer insights in that regard. One of the limitations, and I'll talk about limitations more down the line, but one of the limitations I would say for all of these recommendations is that it doesn't know your specific class, your specific teacher, and the specific context in which you're writing. So if there are specific conversations that happen in the classroom that are then meant to inform how you write or what you write about, of course, ChatGPT won't know those things. So, there is a potential for downfall here. You need to be very careful as a student with regard to what it is you're asking for, and of course, what it is you take away. Right? You don't want to go ahead and have ChatGPT. Of course, the classic idea is it's going to write an essay for you. Not a good idea for a variety of reasons. But it is something where you want to be aware of. It does have some limitations, potentially, depending upon your classroom, depending upon the context, et cetera, et cetera. So keep that in mind for all of these as we go along. For histories, ChatGPT can summarize a lot of things, right? Summaries, I think, are huge for history. They're huge for really any of these, for the most part, because for a lot of students, it can be a difficult thing to transition between the more general breakdown of some topic, be it a concept in science, be it an event in history, be it some kind of theme from a novel. It can be difficult to transition from the general to the more detailed, right? We want to be able to see the big picture, the small picture, and therefore have a conversation around both. And what I mean by that in history is we can look at history as just a series of conflicts from a very sort of grandiose, very sort of meta kind of analysis. It's one conflict after another, right? The things that change the world, the things that really kind of spur humanity forward in some ways, right? There's a conflict there. We talk about going to the moon, right? Being such a tremendous achievement, certainly, but spurred, by the space race. We talk about, the development of the nuclear bomb, certainly, but spurred by, unfortunately, warfare, right? So the history of conflict could be one way to sort of look at history from a very, again, grandiose, big picture, arguably very oversimplified kind of perspective. But that's not an unfair sort of analysis in some ways. With that said, when it comes to being more detailed and speaking to specific events in science, specific events in engineering, that then sort of spurred us forward, as I said earlier, well, getting to the who, the what, the when, the where, that can be very tricky to kind of make that sort of transition, if you will, right? But go very big, go very small. And then furthermore, we have to find interconnectivity between these things and possibly geopolitical relations, possibly ramifications domestically. So there's a lot of things to kind of break down and follow. Summaries can be very helpful in keeping track of what event leads to what, who has a hand in things, and ChatGPT excels with summaries. So with that in mind, keep it handy. Again, history books, very big, very difficult at times to kind of keep up with, maybe kind of boring in some cases. I hate to say it, it's true. At least it can be anyway. ChatGPT can kind of cut through a lot of the conversation sometimes and be very helpful if we know, again, the questions to ask it. With that said, last couple items here. For foreign languages, ChatGPT can grasp really any language you have to throw at it. I mentioned Latin already, but there it is again. To verify that you are writing an effective script for maybe some kind of conversation you have to have in your class, to verify that you have properly grasped the use of certain accent marks or certain syntax that is specific to a foreign language. ChatGPT can help with all those questions that a student might have and more. It can also recommend resources for reading primarily, or even viewing in most cases, for your given level of understanding. So in other words, if you want to go ahead and have an assessment made of your ability to read and or speak, which is to say write, in a foreign language, ChatGPT can work on that assessment with you. If it then has some sense of where you're at with your ability to understand and read or write the language, it can give you a recommendation on how to best sort of develop or be challenged by the language. In other words, if you're reading in Spanish at a third grade level, it can probably recommend third grade level appropriate reading materials so that you're able to see the language with another resource in mind, right? Beyond your textbook, beyond what you see in school, but not push you so far past your ability that it's no longer helpful, right? So in this instance, ChatGPT has, I think, a lot of availability, or a lot of opportunity, I should say, to help students improve with their foreign languages, especially those who are working on their own. Sometimes we have students where they're looking for enrichment opportunities, right? In other words, this is not something they're doing for school, it's something they're doing for themselves. Again, ChatGPT can be great if we don't have access to someone who speaks the language in the moment. ChatGPT, I think, can be kind of a fill-in in that regard. So computer science and other courses, last thing here I should mention, ChatGPT has been remarkable in a lot of ways with its regard for program creation. I was just playing with it a little bit earlier today. I asked for it to create a calculator program, and it did so, I would say, within maybe 20 seconds tops. And, it can do it in Java, Python, C++. So it can actually troubleshoot programs because, funnily enough, there was something in that calculator program it generated that I didn't like. There was something that I hadn't asked it to do, and it was basically to present the answer that I got from my calculation in a very certain way, and it went ahead and actually fixed the program for me. So just by describing programs to ChatGPT and asking it to use a certain computing language, it's able to produce those things. So kind of a fascinating element. I don't know offhand how our software engineers that may be in the audience feel about it, but the bottom line is that ChatGPT can produce these things, at least on a very simple level. I'm no software engineer. I would imagine there may be challenges inherent in certain computing languages, certain tricks of the trade that these engineers out there probably know. But with that said, I'm not aware of what those limitations are for ChatGPT. So bottom line, if you're in a computer science class, it can very likely, at least at that level, troubleshoot anything that you might be having problems with when it comes to submission for the class or other items, et cetera, et cetera. I'm known, for example, that students are actually using ChatGPT to build programs for themselves out of just curiosity. If you're looking, for example, for a program that works like as a web scraper for news articles of a certain variety, be it science or sports, you can have ChatGPT develop a program like that for you, depending upon how you want to play with it in some kind of runtime environment outside of ChatGPT. So this kind of opportunity just to get a program for yourself that you might want to have. Again, kind of an unprecedented opportunity in most cases. Usually you have to pay for that kind of service. ChatGPT, totally free, right? So there we go. With all that said, I want to go ahead and show everyone a little bit of ChatGPT itself, because of course I'm just describing these things that ChatGPT can do, but let's go ahead and actually pop into the environment and see what's going on here. So here is a window of ChatGPT, and I've already asked these questions, so I'll go ahead and ask a live one here in just a moment, but let's go ahead and see what this is. At the very top, you can see this was my instruction, and again, this is all through text. You can see down at the very bottom, I can send a message to ChatGPT. At the very top, this is a history of what I've told it to do. So at the very top here, I said, please summarize the process of photosynthesis in 3 specific steps. Now, notice that I was specific about it being 3 steps. This is very typically how you would see it in a high school setting. In a middle school setting, you would see it usually in 2 steps. So again, depending upon how many steps you want, you can actually change that. In an AP biology setting, you might see it in as many as 12 or 13, right? So you can see it in a lot of steps, depending upon how much information you want. Now, if I go down just a little bit, this is ChatGPT's response. It says the process of photosynthesis can be summarized in 3 steps. And it goes on to list them out. I'll be very brief about this. It says, first, there's the absorption of light energy. Second, the conversion of light energy into chemical energy. And third, finally, the synthesis of organic compounds. And as you can see here, it is sort of fleshing out each of those steps. It's just further breaking down what is going on in each of these steps, much like a textbook would. Now, of course, there's no diagrams here. If we need to know the diagram of a plant cell, specifically the chloroplast organelle in there, that's something that the ChatGPT will not be able to do, right? Because it's only text-based. Of course, you can find images of those things online as well already. So a simple Google search kind of fixes that problem. But the ChatGPT, again, is not the be-all, end-all of information and investigation, or at least it's not yet. So here's my 3 steps. As I go further down, it gives me a little summary. It says, in summary, photosynthesis involves the absorption of light energy, its conversion into chemical energy through a series of reactions, and the synthesis of organic compounds from carbon dioxide using the captured energy. So a nice little kind of ender right there to get all the 3 steps under into one sentence. Now, let's say though, as a student, I'm not happy with this answer. I mean, it seems pretty thorough, right? I'm sure many of us would say, oh, it's pretty good, pretty well thought out there. It's certainly giving me what I wanted, but let's say I'm not happy, right? It's too long. I don't like how long it is. I then went ahead and told ChatGPT to shorten the summary into 1 sentence for each step. I said, it's very verbose. It's a lot going on there, and I'm still not really getting the picture. I'm still not really able to see exactly what's happening 1 step at a time. It's too much information all at once. Well, here's ChatGPT abiding, of course, by what I want. So step 1, light energy is absorbed by chlorophyll and other pigments. Yeah, pretty much. Step 2, light energy is used to split water molecules, releasing oxygen and producing hydrogen ions and electrons. Absolutely. And of course, step number 3, we use this energy obtained to take carbon dioxide and build out organic compounds, primarily glucose. Now you'll notice that ChatGPT, of course, is always leaving room for investigation. So if you wanted to ask, well, wait a second, what other organic compounds are going to be built? Or what other pigments in chloroplasts are potentially going to be used? There's always this opportunity to ask sort of pointed questions about whatever ChatGPT responds with. So anytime you want to know more, just ask again, and I guarantee that it'll go ahead and expand on the answer. In this way, ChatGPT is useful really at any level of investigation. I mentioned a moment ago how middle school normally is about 2 steps in photosynthesis. High school is about 3. And then if you're at more of a college level, it expands further. So no matter where you're at in your understanding of the photosynthetic process, you can go ahead and get information on, well, what is it all about, basically. And again, if I told ChatGPT to explain photosynthesis in like an odd number, let's say 7 steps, it could probably go ahead and do that. It might have to be very picky and choosy about where it divides the steps, but it'll go ahead and abide pretty well. And it might even tell me, though, that that's a problem. It might say, well, it's normally explained in 2 or 3 or 12 or something like that. 7's an odd number, but I'll go ahead and give it a shot. And the bottom line is you'll get some kind of answer no matter what. Let's say, for example, though, that I'm a math student. And I say, I'm working through integration right now, and I'm just having a bit of a hard time through it. I think I kind of got it, though. So let me go ahead and test myself. Let me see if I can do some math problems from outside of a textbook and maybe have ChatGPT kind of help me work through them a little bit. So I said, please provide 5 calculus problems that require integration to solve. And it gave me right here, sure, here are 5 calculus problems that require integration to solve. So it wants the definite integral of a function as x goes from 1 to 4 for number 1. It wants me to determine the area between the curve y equals x cubed and the x-axis from x equals 0 to x equals 2. So we have a function, y equals, and we have sort of a range for the x-axis there, x to 0 or x to 2. It wants me to calculate the total distance traveled by an object with this velocity from when time is 0 to when time is 5. It wants me to evaluate a definite integral of another piece down here, which has some trigonometric functions, a little sine, cosine action. And then finally, it wants me to determine the volume of a solid generated by rotating this curve around the x-axis from here to here. It says these problems involve different applications of integration, such as finding areas, calculating distances, and determining volumes. So let's say, for example, then I don't need to worry about volumes. Maybe we're just focusing on single dimension and second dimension kind of problems here. I can go ahead and tell it, hey, go ahead and omit the volumes. Don't give me any volumetric kind of problems or problems tied to volume. Once more, I can kind of curate the problems it gives me a little bit and say, I really just need to focus on area, and I have to go ahead and focus on definite integrals. And once again, it'll go ahead and change the problems for me or give me all new ones. So again, kind of abiding by my request. I can kind of pinpoint as a student what it is I want to learn, what it is I want to focus on with this program. And let's say that, I've got the answers on my paper. Obviously, I'm not doing the questions that it gave me online. I'm writing them down on my piece of paper and kind of solving them out. And I want to know if I got it right. So I say, hey, please provide the answers to those 5 questions. And there we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It tells me the answer for number 1 is 78. The answer for number 2 is 4, and so on and so forth. So just like that, not only can I get the problems, but I can get the answers, and I can probably go ahead and proof and check my work. I can even ask ChatGPT to show me the steps that would be taken to solve these problems. So let's say that I get a different answer. I want to go ahead and check my math. I'm using integral or integration. I'm doing everything right. I'm going to go ahead and ask ChatGPT, hey, can you show me how you got to the answer for number 1? And it'll go ahead and do that for me. So again, in the same way that I would ask a teacher to go ahead and show me the work, ChatGPT can do that too. Let's say that I wanted to do something in language arts, classic novel, The Great Gatsby, and I say, please identify some major themes from The Great Gatsby or of The Great Gatsby. And here they are, right, in full. There's the theme of the American dream. The novel examines the concept of the American dream and its corruption. It portrays characters who are driven by the pursuit of wealth, success, and social status, but ultimately find themselves disillusioned and empty. As someone who loves The Great Gatsby and has taught it a lot, of course, that's very spot on. Wealth and materialism, also a big theme of the novel. Illusion versus reality, a massive, massive theme. Social class and social stratification. Yes, we see that all over the book, the haves and the have-nots. Love and desire, the loss of innocence. All of these are major themes in the book. Now, are there any themes that are not written down here, not being proposed by ChatGPT? Yes, of course. You can find some more minor themes. You can go ahead and talk about how the use of violence is kind of pointed within the book. It's very specific, and you don't see it in many cases. You can talk about how there's elements of conspiracy throughout the book at various times and how that's sort of used in certain ways. So there are sort of like sub-themes, smaller things you can kind of nail down. But if you're in a class that in general is just going through The Great Gatsby and it's not going to be so pointed or unique, so to speak, in its evaluation of the book, of the novel, this is a great start, I think, for kind of breaking down some of the themes. If you want to go ahead and explore these themes, you can do that too. So if I go on to the next the next question, I asked which character's story arc, meaning I notice how the book, I didn't mention The Great Gatsby, but ChatGPT knows what story I'm referring to because it is programmed to behave like we're in a conversation. So I don't need to reference The Great Gatsby specifically. I can just say, something about a story. So I say, which character's story arc has the most to do with the theme of illusion versus reality, right? So of course, one of the big themes we just mentioned up here, and I'm like, well, I get the theme, but where would I see it? How would I understand it if I were reading this book? And so it tells me that the character whose story arc is most closely tied to the theme of illusion versus reality is, of course, Jay Gatsby himself. Gatsby is depicted as a self-made man who fabricates an elaborate persona and creates an illusion of wealth, success, and glamour. And so it goes on to describe what's going on with Jay Gatsby in the story, why he's doing this a little bit. And it goes on to explain how his story arc actually, again, kind of captures this theme. It says further later on, the illusion gradually unravels, revealing the stark contrast between his self-created image and the reality of his past and present. So once again, illusion versus reality. Jay Gatsby is known as this sort of tycoon, if you will, although of what we're not really sure, or to what field or industry he belongs. It's never really made clear. So the bottom line, though, is we see him in one sort of presentation, and as the book goes on, everything kind of unravels. Hopefully I'm not spoiling the book for anybody at this point. But of course, ChatGPT captures that. It knows this and is able to explain this as if I were someone who either never read the book or was having trouble grasping, again, this theme, this element of it. So as we go on, let's do just one more here. I asked ChatGPT, let's say I was in a history class, and I say, what are the perceived impacts of the Marshall Plan on America and Europe? And this was a time after, I believe, World War II. I'm not a huge history buff, but if I remember right, it was after World War II. And the Marshall Plan, I know, was something that was intended to help Europe rebuild. It was America kind of going out of its way to help Europe get back on its feet after the horror of World War II. So it goes on to say, the Marshall Plan, officially known as the European Recovery Program, has significant perceived impacts on the relationship between America and Europe. Here are some of the key effects. Now, notice how all these sound pretty positive. We talk about rebuilding Europe. We talk about strengthening transatlantic bonds. We talk about fostering mutual interdependence, counteracting communist influence. These are all things that are perceived as being positives of the Marshall Plan. And it goes on and on here. So let's say, though, that I need some kind of counterweight. Let's say that I need something that is, not so positive, not so cheery about the Marshall Plan. I say, well, are there any contrary opinions about the Marshall Plan? Does anyone think it was nefarious or problematic in some way? And it says, while the Marshall Plan is generally regarded as a positive and successful initiative, it is important to note that there have been differing opinions and criticisms regarding its implementation and effects. Here are a few contrary opinions that have been expressed. Economic dependency, political manipulation, unequal distribution, impact on colonies, and economic imbalances. Notice that these elements were nowhere to be found in the initial ask, because I was looking for just generally perceived impacts, and it is generally thought of as a good plan or having something of a good impact on the world. But of course, not everyone feels that way. I know that. And maybe in my classroom, we were looking for ways in which the Marshall Plan arguably didn't live up to all of its intended goals or all of its intended benefits. In this way, I can go ahead and simply ask, hey, ChatGPT, does everyone think this is a good thing, or are there some contrary opinions? And it'll go ahead and simply give me that answer. So finally, then I'm saying again to myself, look, this is too long. It's too much information. Can you go ahead and summarize these pros and cons for me using no more than one sentence for each pro or con? And of course, it does exactly that, right? So now I've got my pros neatly listed out here. I've got my cons neatly listed out here, and we're all very happy with that, aren't we? So we're all looking at the summaries and saying, wow, that actually looks pretty good on the page. That formatting is wonderful, and it's very easy, very accessible to go ahead and break down. Now, I would say this, as a student, I'd be very happy with this tool. I'd be pretty, excited to go ahead and apply it to anything I'm learning and get a better insight into things. And look, we want to go ahead and be clear. On the one hand, I think it's getting kind of ahead of myself, but educators are going to have to ask themselves, what is important? Is it important that students, thoroughly read every single nook and cranny of detail of the Marshall Plan and know it in and out? Maybe for a given assignment could be very helpful. But is it maybe more relevant that they understand the impact it had on the world and be able then maybe to look at other plans or other significant initiatives and how they similarly or dissimilarly impacted the world either after a war or after a specific event, et cetera, some kind of period of rebuilding, basically. So in other words, if a student is able to understand pros and cons of the Marshall Plan and then be able to therefore sort of look through that lens at other plans, or like I said, other initiatives, maybe that's the goal, right? I think, again, as educators, we're going to have to ask, what is the intention behind this lesson? Or what is it that we're trying to get students to pull as a lesson from history? So on the one hand, we could look at ChatGPT and say, man, it's just summarizing everything. It's really breaking these things down pretty cleanly. And the student isn't having to really pore over the book and generate these pros and cons for him or herself. True. Again, that's arguably true. It does take some of the bricks out of the briefcase if you're a student. But again, I think as an educator, the question is, well, what was the goal to begin with? Was the goal that the student read the book, or was the goal that the student take away something from it and be able to sort of use that takeaway to evaluate other things, or who knows what? To be fair, I'm not a history teacher. And to be clear, sometimes maybe it is to read the book, in which case ChatGPT could be a bit of a problem, which we'll talk about in a moment. But otherwise, you have to go ahead and ask as a teacher, what is it we're trying to accomplish? And does ChatGPT necessarily get in the way of that? I don't think that it always does. It certainly can, but I don't think it always does. So anyways, that is a quick breakdown of ChatGPT. If you want to play with this is totally free. You just have to make an account. Just Google ChatGPT online, get an account going, and you can start working with it anytime you want. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and get back to the slide deck and start kind of getting the rest of this wrapped up, because there's not too much time left on the docket tonight. So let's go ahead and move on to the response to ChatGPT. So we kind of know what it is. We kind of know how students can use it for specific classes and coursework. What has the response been by educators, by teachers, or school districts, etc.? Well, out of the gate, look, everyone acknowledges, I think, that ChatGPT and AI structures like it are tremendously powerful. And there's some valid concerns about plagiarism, inappropriate uses. In other words, students just kind of letting the tool do the work for them. I think it's a very valid concern, a very big worry that is maybe the paramount one at present. I'd say here in my next bullet point, programs have already been developed. Almost as soon as ChatGPT came out, people made the connection between learning and language models like this. And they said, okay, well, how do we know if if an essay is legit, meaning it was created solely by a student, or how do we recognize something that is developed by an artificial intelligence? Because ChatGPT, if asked, will write essays for you. If you simply feed it a prompt, it will go ahead and produce something that would be arguably passable as far as, sort of having 5-paragraph structure, clear thesis, all those things, big so what statement at the conclusion. If you provided those parameters, it will go ahead and build something that is totally legible and totally reasonable as far as an essay goes. Of course, again, programs have already been developed to sniff out that exact thing. So using AI to go ahead and write essays, a bad idea in general. But also something that'll probably, land you in some hot water, most likely. This is likely to increase as educators fully grasp what ChatGPT can do. I have a relatively limited window in the students that I work with, which are predominantly in California, in the Bay Area, although some are around the world too, to be fair. And what I'm hearing from them already is that these programs are in place, that there are serious ramifications for anyone caught using them in a way that is deemed immoral, effectively, or just not reasonable for students. So it's likely to increase as more and more educators, if it hasn't already, become aware of this, and school districts start asking, well, what is it that our students are doing? What are we sort of trusting but verifying in terms of the quality of their work, et cetera, et cetera. And this is not really only a K through 12 issue. It's been colleges and college students who've actually taken the most notice of ChatGPT and its capabilities. I mentioned earlier that many students, especially college students, have asked ChatGPT to write very specific programs for it in JavaScript and C++ and things like that. And they've been very successful with sort of eking out different ways that ChatGPT can be useful for them in their studies, but also for them in a very general sense. Furthermore, students have used ChatGPT students and teachers, I say here at the bottom, have actually developed business opportunities and learning opportunities through ChatGPT that were kind of previously impossible. I mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation that in a history context, you might want ChatGPT to sort of emulate, if you will, a dead personality, someone like Abraham Lincoln. Could be someone like Custer, or some personality from the Civil War, etc. So there's a variety of people that ChatGPT is able and willing to kind of emulate, where teachers and professors may just find it kind of awkward or really not have enough information to accurately do that. But if we imagine as history teachers and learners being able to interact with the past in a more direct way, right? Like you're kind of like texting with Abraham Lincoln, that could be a very powerful opportunity. It's something that many teachers have actually noted as well. So on the one hand, there's a response, a concern, if you will, around ChatGPT effectively doing the work. But there's also, I think, an understanding that there's an opportunity here. And that's really how I am going to encourage everyone to sort of see it, with some caveats. I think it really is kind of an opportunity that we want to consider very carefully. What should parents be aware of? All right, so parents, I mentioned this earlier, what should we be looking out for in order to just better understand what our kids might be getting up to. Of course, you always have to worry about, the internet in general. It's a very big place, but now with ChatGPT and these language models everywhere, what are some things to be concerned about? Again, through the lens specifically of education. Now, as say here in the top left, while everyone naturally wants children to succeed, the availability of ChatGPT, I say, can be likened to the availability of calculators from long ago. Many people kind of forgot this, but calculators within modern history, well, they're a fairly new invention, or at least they became widely available and fairly recently in the last, I think, 60 or 70 years or so. So the point is that calculators, when they first came out and were first widely available for math courses, there was this outcry, there was this concern that children just won't learn math anymore. If you got a calculator that can just do it for you, well, what do we need math for? Notice, of course, that didn't happen. Notice, of course, in other words, that we still learn math. And if anything, we need to learn math more and more effectively than we do currently. So just because the calculator exists does not mean that math went out the window. In fact, again, I think the calculator can be a little bit of a problem for learning math. And a whole other kind of conversation right there. But again, it's something very similar, I think, at least in some small regards. ChatGPT, of course, far, far more powerful and far more far-reaching than just a calculator. But in terms of what it means for education, I think there are some parallels there. So keep that in mind. I next talk about, and you'll hear me say this a couple more times, real learning. I think the loss of real learning could be a concern here. Again, if we're relying too heavily on ChatGPT, well, the question is whether a student is gaining a skill set that all education tends to impart on them. In other words, their ability to research, their ability to analyze, their ability to think for themselves. If ChatGPT is used over and over to conquer one assignment after another, the problem technically is not with ChatGPT. I would argue it's going to be with the assignments. Assignments, I think, will have to be more challenging in the future. They will have to have a greater depth to them. Otherwise, yeah, ChatGPT is going to be seen as a very easy sort of solve-all problem, or sort of cure-all, if you will, for any challenge you're likely to see in the classroom. Now, that puts a little bit of the onus on teachers and educators, of course. They have to go ahead and acknowledge, just like we did with the calculator, this is here. This is real. This is something that everybody who wants to sign up for it will have access to. So what do we do? The idea can't be to ban ChatGPT in the same way you didn't ban calculators. Although there was a suggestion to do so, but you can't. You can't monitor a student at all times. You can't do that. So the question is, well, if you have to adapt to it, what does that look like? And I think that's something they're still figuring out, quite frankly. Over there to the right, I say, schools are going to have to change policies and curricula to quote unquote combat. And I use that word very, very loosely here to be clear. It's not really a combat, I think, or at least it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be seen that way. But to utilize ChatGPT for in-class assignments becoming either more significant, meaning work you do in the classroom becoming more significant. Unfortunately, punishments for ChatGPT may become more serious as well. But it really will be something we have to watch the school districts and the teachers on a case-by-case basis, kind of what it is they do. But once again, no one's going to ban access to this, and no one's going to be able to carry that out even if they tried. So the question becomes, well, what do we do differently in the classroom, basically? And finally, what are some implications? I want to go ahead and kind of move through these fairly quickly. I apologize, I'm running out of time for tonight's webinar. First and foremost, I would call this a bit of a revolution. AI programs like ChatGPT, primarily for students, it should not be underestimated. It should not be sort of underutilized or underthought of. This will be something that ultimately has very far-reaching impacts on industry, professional world. So the more students are aware of it now, technically the better prepared they will be to anticipate the needs of the future when it comes to not only college, but again, getting them into various occupations. It's something that I think if they have more experience with it through the lens of schoolwork, they can then be able to apply it and appreciate it through the lens of their professional work. So it's something that I think will change a lot of the terrain out there for the professional world, which is why, frankly, it should inform a little bit of what we do, or maybe a lot of what we do right now in the educational world. Real learning is something, again, I'm circling around. I do think the concern would be students who miss out or maybe possibly deprive themselves of real learning because of access to things like ChatGPT. Again, I mentioned the calculator earlier. Can you use the calculator to solve arguably any math problem, if you know what it is you're doing with it, yes, you can. But can a calculator teach you how to build a bridge? Can a calculator teach you how to build a rocket ship? Can it teach you how to build a car? It can't do those things. Can it teach you how to design these things in a way that suits your personal needs or suits a context that a program may have trouble understanding or fully appreciating? No, it can't do those things. Real learning is still going to be very necessary for students to be successful down the line. ChatGPT, again, will take the bricks out of the briefcase. It'll make your life a lot easier. But if you rely on it too much, it'll become a crutch, quite frankly. Standardized examinations, last a little bit I have here, they may very well hold more weight in the future because standardized examinations, things that have a lot going for them, we think about like the SAT, the ACT, beyond that, like the MCAT, GRE, LSAT, etc. These are things where ChatGPT really has not a lot of hope of helping you. Those things are too broad, they're too nuanced, they have a high degree of specialization at the same time that they go very broad in their requirements of knowledge. So ChatGPT is not going to really have, at least right now, a lot of traction for the majority of students preparing for those exams. It has a real potential to think for students if they're not careful. I mentioned that there in the top, and it's important to understand that, again, it can help you with the what, but not with the how of thinking, as I say. And I try to explain this to students very carefully. You know, what you want to know about something is one thing. How to think about it is another. I give you an example of the Marshall Plan earlier. The Marshall Plan certainly had people who felt very strongly about it, felt it was a very good thing. Other people felt that it was a very negative thing. ChatGPT can report both sides of that perspective, but which one you should adopt is completely up to you. Unless you want to just go ahead and defer to ChatGPT for all your thinking, I don't recommend that. You're going to have to still work through nuance, work through detail. Now, again, as far as a history assignment goes, it may very well be enough. But in terms of real learning, in terms of building a skill set and being able to analyze things carefully, it isn't there. It's not ready to do that for us. As I said, it has no thoughts of its own. We do. We still have thoughts of our own. ChatGPT is, well, just not quite there. Thankfully, maybe. Also, by the way, I mentioned ChatGPT is fed on information that can be found online, not in your classroom. This goes back to context, locality, something a district is doing, something that's unique to you in some way. ChatGPT, because it's sort of drawing aggregates of information, it can arguably be tricked. It can arguably be fooled or unhelpful in specific instances. So keep that in mind. It's not the be-all, end-all of knowledge. The internet is vast, but also still finite. And the internet, being as vast as it is full of misinformation. As we all know, the internet can be wrong. Just because you have thousands or hundreds of people contributing to something doesn't mean you always get the answer you're looking for. Sometimes you get a lot of noise, in fact, and that's again what ChatGPT is drawing from. It does a good job of drawing from it and being very careful in how it curates things, but it's not perfect, not perfect. All right, let's go ahead and start kind of wrapping things up. Some final takeaways from the evening. ChatGPT is a tool that should be used responsibly. Again, I liken it to a calculator. I think it's a great analogy, just personally speaking. Potentially not at all in some cases if real learning is being valued. Again, there will be instances where you want to put down a calculator and really work a problem by hand. There will be instances where you don't want the what to think. You want to exercise your ability to think. You want to know how to think and break something down for yourself. ChatGPT is great for getting access to information, but analyzing it, dissecting it, and helping you to get to a personal standpoint on it, that's another activity entirely. Hopefully, schools are going to take note of this and require that more of their students. I want to say they haven't done that as much in the past. I think by requiring students to demonstrate their own positions, either through possibly oral examinations or other examinations, I think that might be the way to go. ChatGPT is great for many general questions, but again has limitations for larger, more complex ones. In other words, if you want to ask, what would the world be like if the US Revolution had never happened, or do aliens exist? ChatGPT is going to respond with just an aggregate of very general information. you're going to need to ask a more pointed question if you want to get to a more pointed answer. So it's not, again, the end all or be all end all of insights into the world at large. It's not a time machine. It's not a predictor of everything. It can give you some maybe touch points to work with in terms of solving that problem or solving that question. But ultimately, questions that are too big, the answers are too big and therefore not really helpful, right? What is the meaning of life? You could be here all night and all day and so on and so forth and still not come up with a good answer. ChatGPT would have the same problem. As I say, they're asking the right questions will make all the difference in finding the support you're looking for. A couple last items here. Again, I'm circling one more time to standardized exams, college application essays. Again, surprisingly little or no traction with ChatGPT. I say surprisingly only because we've talked all about what ChatGPT can do and the capabilities seem fantastical. But standardized exams, again, too big, too broad in terms of what they need students to know and be masters of. ChatGPT just can't really replicate those things, right? We can't really replicate a 3-hour exam from ChatGPT, or if you could, it wouldn't really mean anything just because, again, too big. College application essay is a great example here. Someone asked immediately, well, can it write my essays for me? Yes, it can. Can it write really good, impactful, insightful, personalized essays? No. How could it? It doesn't know you. It doesn't know your family, doesn't know your experiences. So when it comes to college applications, ChatGPT is just not a way to go. And I think the vast majority of AI complexes will not be helpful. There's just too much information they don't have access to, right? They have access to the internet, they don't have access to you. So that's something to kind of hang on to. And find ChatGPT down there in the bottom right. It can do simple assessments of student learning, but it should not be seen as a perfect evaluation ahead of big tests or assignments. Again, it doesn't adequately understand your teacher's guidelines, content inside your personal textbook or novel. Once more, it is a fantastic tool, but past a certain point, it lacks a finesse, it lacks an insight that will really ensure that you are as prepared as possible for a given exam. Frankly, an instructor who is closer to the ground, so to speak, closer to what it is you do on a day-to-day in your classroom, that will be a much better resource to ensure for sure that you are prepared for an exam or something big coming up, as opposed to ChatGPT. So, final takeaways, I guarantee, continue to rely on human elements. If you are, as a student or a parent or anybody, concerned about your learning, human elements are still by far the absolute best resources. Parents, teachers, peers, tutors like myself, and of course those that I work with. As I said a moment ago, we're just closer to the ground. We can interpret your challenges and your situation, your position in the classroom better than ChatGPT can. Even if you took all of the elements that we would be considerate of and explained them to ChatGPT, its understanding of those situations, right? Your obligations to a club, your challenges with extracurriculars, your difficulty with sports, how your teacher talks to you in class, all these things, it'll only understand those things through the lens of the internet, the lens of the giant information aggregate that it has access to, which isn't you, that's not your life, right? It's, as I said, it's an aggregate, it's an average, effectively, of a lot of information, but that's not you, you're not an average. You are a very specific individual, and ChatGPT simply can't know that in the same way that a human being can. In time, I say here, ChatGPT and models like it will probably continue to proliferate, right? These are not going away. I don't think they're a flash in the pan. We've seen them everywhere so far. Social media platforms all over the place have access to them now. Khan Academy has built an AI learning platform to help students prepare for the SAT and stuff like that, or try to. I think we're going to see it for a lot of different spheres of life, but ultimately, again, human competence is still necessary. As I said earlier, a calculator and frankly, ChatGPT, they can't teach you how to build a bridge. They can't teach you how to work with a team. They can't teach you a lot of skills you will need in your profession and in your life. So don't get too comfortable with them, right? Fantastic tools, but they are just that, just tools. They cannot be used in place of skills, and they can't replace talent ultimately in a lot of cases. I would say down here, very important, adopt a use it or lose it attitude, especially when it comes to your brain. So I know I've talked about how fantastic ChatGPT is, but students out there, please hear me as well. Use it or lose it when it comes to your brain. The more you think, the more you analyze, the more you try to digest complex information, challenging information, it makes you grow, it makes you better in the same way that lifting weights in the gym or running the track will make you a fitter individual physically. Taking on challenging books, working through challenging analyses, it will make you a stronger, fitter individual mentally and frankly, emotionally in many cases. And spiritually, depends on the books you're reading, right? Frankly, right? But the bottom line is don't rely on ChatGPT as much as you might think. I think, quite frankly, that it is initially seen by students as some kind of gift from whatever God you believe in, and it's going to go ahead and replace all the work we ever do. I don't think that's the case at all. It is something where it'll require some adaptation, some changes. It should not be ignored, but ultimately, it is something that is only as good as the person using it, and the person using it will still need to be knowledgeable, need to be insightful in order to be effective at whatever it is they do. So, final little piece here, if anybody has seen WALL-E, right? WALL-E, one of the best, movies out there back in the day anyway. If you remember in that movie, the human beings have developed technology that allows them to sit around all day and do nothing at all. If you remember the human beings from this movie, as we see pictured here, not terribly attractive individuals, not terribly useful individuals, considering that all they do is eat and watch goofy TV. This is your brain on too much ChatGPT, right? I talked about the analogy with fitness, physical fitness, that is. ChatGPT can now allow you to varying degrees to be very mentally lazy. If you were so inclined, I am strongly recommending that you not be inclined to be mentally lazy. So again, take it for what it is, but there we are. Finally, that is the webinar. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I wish I had time to take questions. I'm going to have to wrap it up here, though. I did want to leave you, though, with some opportunities to connect with us. Again, I'm Stephen. I am the Director of Education here for Beyond Education Consulting. If you have questions or concerns, my email is right now up on the screen. Our administrative team and our website are also posted there as well. Here in these bullet points is some information about what it is we do. This webinar will be reposted on our social media websites and YouTube. You'll be notified of what we call the webinar rewind. So if you have questions or concerns, if there are things you want to go ahead and follow up on, or you feel like you missed part of the webinar, please go ahead and visit those places. Let us know. Feel free to email me if any questions or concerns you have, or possibly insights. If you think I missed something about ChatGPT, feel free to go ahead and let me know. I, as an educator myself, am still learning and still getting used to this new era in which we live, where ChatGPT is going to be very much a part of, a lot of what we do down the line. So thank you to everyone again who joined us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the webinar just about now. And I hope everybody has a fantastic evening or morning or afternoon whenever you're watching this. So thanks so much. And again, reach out anytime. Have a good one.